astrologer Yasmin, and I will be taking a look at the astrology for the week ahead in the coming hour. I'll also be talking to my fellow Hay House author Charlie Morley about working with the shadow through lucid dreaming. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that we've been talking a lot about working with the shadow since Jupiter moved into shadowy Scorpio a few weeks ago. So we'll be doing that, and I will be taking your calls. So please call in. If you don't know the number, you can find them on the front page of my website, moonology.com, like astrology, but moonology.com. I just posted them there 3 seconds ago. So right, let's get down to it and take a look at the highlights of the astrology for the week ahead. For one thing, as this show goes to air on Tuesday, the 5th of December 2017, we are still in the full moon phase. If you work with the moon, you'll be aware that the full moon took place in the sign of Gemini just a few days ago. And if you felt a sort of emotional explosion, or if you've been surrounded by lots of people who are kind of shouty or argumentative, that is probably to do with the full moon in Gemini. The reason for this is that the full moon is the climax of every lunar cycle. We get one full moon a month. The moon in astrology is the queen of emotions. She represents emotions. And as the moon grows to fullness every month, when she's as round as she can possibly get, swollen and beautiful and beaming, that's when our emotions swell, which is why we traditionally all go a little bit crazy at the time of the full moon every month. I was talking to someone the other day who worked in an ER room, a casualty room in a hospital. And she was saying that, the anecdotal stories that I, as an astrologer, hear about nurses going, oh no, it's a full moon. She said it's absolutely true. The casualty wards go crazy. ER goes crazy when it's a full moon, and it's not just a story. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because you never know if it's just people saying it. But she's like, nah, it's all nurses will tell you the same thing. So the full moon is always a really, really intense time emotionally. And the reason why there have been arguments around the place lately is that the full moon was in the sign of Gemini. Gemini being more or less the most chatty / communicative / talkative sign of the zodiac. So basically what you've got then is you've got the full moon with all the emotional intensity taking place in the sign of Gemini, which is the planet that expresses itself through talking and writing. And when you get all that emotion and all that communication, of course there are going to be some emotional explosions. If you've been through that was the full moon, and it's time to breathe again. There's been a lot of stuff about getting real as well, because Gemini can be a bit of a chatty sign to the point of being a sign that glosses over things. We all have Gemini in our chart somewhere, and that's where we like to gloss over things, and maybe we're a bit superficial in that part of our life. So when the emotional intensity of the full moon combines with glossy, slightly somewhat sometimes superficial Gemini, it can be a time where we're not being as honest or as having as much integrity as we can, and that's also going to lead to problems and more emotional explosions. This is why it's so important to work with the full moon through all the signs over the course of a year. Now, this was the last full moon of 2017. As I said, we are still in the full moon phase for about, I think about another 12 hours. And one of the reasons why this full moon is so important, even as it starts to wane, is that it was the last full moon of 2017, and therefore, since the full moon is always a time of releasing negativity, it's a time where we can start to actually release anything negative that happened in 2017. So if you think back over the past 12 months, have a think about, say, the top 3 things which come to mind that either upset you, were dramas, were difficult. It can even be that you were being loving and supporting to someone as they went through a very difficult time, and that took an emotional toll on you. It could have been you were involved with someone who wasn't being very nice to you. even if you've worked things out, it's the time to start releasing. And the end of the year is always the time to start releasing. And as we go through the 2 weeks of the waning cycle, as we move towards the end of the year, it's time to release and let go. Okay, if you would like to know where the full moon took place in your chart, if you'd like to work with the full moon, or if you'd like to work more on full moon forgiveness and releasing, I highly recommend my full moon forgiveness sheets, which you can find at moonmessages.com/forgiveness, moonmessages.com/forgiveness. Now, the other thing that's been going on while this full moon has been taking place is that Mercury, the planet of communications, and also the planet that strongly identifies with the sign of Gemini and also with the sign of Virgo, Mercury is now retrograde. So basically we've had the full moon in Gemini with Gemini planet Mercury now going backwards. So Mercury retrograde is basically tapping into the full moon madness. It's like someone, taking a pot of trouble and giving it a good stir. If you don't know, Mercury is the planet of communications and the mind. This time around, Mercury will be reversing in the sign of Sagittarius. And this cycle is going to continue until the end of December, or nearly the end of December. Mercury retrograde is a time to do some practical things like backing up your computers, backing up your photos from the year that's just gone if you haven't already done it. It's a time to kind of go through all your stuff, go through that pile of papers. If you're anything like me, you've got a pile of papers. Go through your pile of papers and see what you can release, let go, get rid of. Mercury retrograde is about doing things again, especially anything that's to do with communications or thinking or writing. It's a time to revisit, revise, re-edit, redo, reorganize. And actually at this time of the year it can be quite nice because a lot of people, of course, will be going home for the holidays. And when that happens, doing that with Mercury going backwards has its kind of pluses and minuses. So if you are going home for the holidays, listen up. On the one hand, when Mercury is going backwards, you do need to allow a little bit of extra time in your schedule for all manner of craziness that can come up, because Mercury retrograde is strongly associated with mayhem. And especially because it's the travel planet, is associated with short trips. If you're taking a short trip, the retrograde cycle can mean your trip goes a little awry. It doesn't mean anything terrible is going to happen. It just means that, you might go slightly off your itinerary, for example. And I know many of the listeners of this show and of the wonderful Hay House Radio are in the USA. And I think I've seen so many films over the years showing people in racing across America, all the American films, racing across America, lots of snow if you're on the East Coast, and racing home to the family for the holidays. Well, this year you're doing it with Mercury retrograde. So I would even say allow an extra day either side if you possibly can. Also remember that the start and the finish of a Mercury retrograde cycle is extra intense, and this week we are at the start of the cycle, which again is why tapping into the full moon, there's been possibly more mayhem and madness than usual. I'll have more on this astrological cycle as it unfolds, well, a little bit next week anyway, because in fact next week's going to be the last show of the year. I think we're back on air on January 2nd. And also, by the way, if you want to find out more about Mercury retrograde and what it means for you based on your star sign, or better yet, on your rising sign, you can read about that in my weekly stars on my other website that I've actually only started this year. It's still under construction. If you go to visit it, you'll see. It's called Yastrology. I'm Yasmin. It's called Yastrology. It's like astrology with a Y at the start of it. Yastrology.com. I'm actually going to talk you through as well a couple of big events that are happening this week in the skies, which are to do with Mercury, which are going to strongly influence us. So we've got Mercury conjunct Saturn, which is actually taking place tomorrow, Wednesday. If you need to make an agreement with someone, and you can do it today, especially if it's an agreement that you started a long time ago, it's a really good time to do it, assuming you don't mind doing it while Mercury is going backwards. Signing contracts, for example, when Mercury is going backwards, can be a really good thing because it means that you can renegotiate the contract later, which is always a plus. In fact, the Beatle John Lennon's wife Yoko Ono reportedly likes to sign contracts when Mercury is going backwards because she knows she can renegotiate later. And now I think of it, I just signed a big contract myself, so I've done it while Mercury's going backwards. There you go. Tomorrow we're going to get Mercury, then after tomorrow we're going to have Mercury sextiling Mars and then trining Uranus. So basically this week, even though Mercury's going backwards, it's a good time for communications. So just remember, when Mercury's going backwards, communications can be a bit fuzzy, but it's a good time to be reaching out to people, especially if you want to make plans for the end of the year now, because basically people are going to be in the mood to talk. The mood should be quite buoyant now we've got over the intensity of the full moon. And just to mention something, I'm actually doing some Moonology oracle cards in 2018. They're coming out next year. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, because Mercury, the planet of communications and writing, is going backwards in Sagittarius, the sign of publishing. And I was thinking, I wonder what this means. So if anything happens, I will let you know. Hopefully it's all going to be good, whatever happens. I'm thinking they're going to get me to either do a big re-edit on the work that I've submitted, which is possible, or if I check, maybe these cards were actually commissioned when Mercury was going backwards. The thing is that quite often what happens when Mercury is going backwards can then be followed up later during another Mercury retrograde cycle, basically a Mercury retrograde cycle a bit further down the track. And I just wanted to mention one kind of caution this week. Venus, the planet of romance and riches, is going to be making a square to Neptune. Now, on the one hand, it can be just, about, let's see, how can I put this? Having a bit too much to drink with your lover or a really good friend and regretting it the next day. I mean, it literally could be that simple. But it could also be having someone who's not quite on the level with you, who's not being quite honest with you, who maybe is being a little bit deceptive. If you feel that's going on in your life this week, I really don't want to give anyone a negative self-fulfilling prophecy, but if you feel like someone's not being quite on the level with you, this is a good week to, I wouldn't say confront them, I'd say to kind of watch, listen and learn, because you might be surprised at what you find out. But overall, a very, very positive looking week. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll be back same time, same place next week. Until then, see you later.